Hi, and welcome to this Communicate 2020 session on podcast and audio revolution. My name's Lisa Marley, and I am the creator and host of Crimes Against Nature podcast and a filmmaker. And I'm joined here today by executive editor of BBC Audio, James Cook. Hi, James. How are you?
I am all right, thank you.
Fantastic. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Yeah, sure. So I have been working in audio for about 20 years, mainly at the BBC. I currently work in a thing called the Creative Development Unit, which is a small team really with a remit to look at particulate podcasting and how we do it and how we can innovate in it and how we need to evolve ourselves both, creatively in terms of what we produce, but also maybe organizationally in terms of how we produce it. But before that, I worked on quite a lot of natural history stuff. So I helped make a thing called Forest 404. For Radio 4, I worked on natural histories and Tweet of the Day. For the World Service, we did a podcast called 30 Animals that made us smarter. Nature Bang for Radio 4, we did the Dawn Chorus Live. So I've sort of been in and around natural history, broadcasting and podcasting for a few years, at least. The one thing I'm not is a zoologist. So I just want to make that absolutely clear at the start of this session that I come as a professional maker of audio, but I don't claim any expertise in the subject matter, if you like. And I've had the pleasure of working with lots of brilliant producers who I'm sure I will talk about in a bit across the time.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think before we get into it, we've got a couple of polls. So if you look above your chat area, there should be a poll section. And we have a couple. Do you listen to podcasts and are you interested in making podcasts? Just so we know exactly who we're speaking to and what you want to know about. And there'll be a chance for some questions and answers in a little bit too. So let's start with the basics of podcasting. Can you tell us a bit about what people need to know when they're getting started and what they need to think about?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Look, so obviously podcasting's been a big change in the industry in the last, well, I mean, it depends when you start counting, but we could say the last 20 years. Certainly, I think in terms of the public consciousness in the last 10 years or so, it's basically a new way of delivering the audio. And look, the first thing to say is, in a sense, we're in an age when the rules are being rewritten. So I'd say that with a pinch of salt and a pinch of humility, that these are some things you might want to think about if you are interested in making your own podcast, either as an individual or, within an institution. So look, I think the first thing you should think about always, whenever you start at any endeavor, is that who is it for? Who's going to listen to this? What offer are you going to make these people to make them take time out of their day and listen to you banging on about something? And, and to keep coming back, because that's the key. You want them to keep coming back. So really think hard about who is it for? What is your audience? What do they look like? It is worth investing in a bit of kit. I'm no need to go overboard, but a decent microphone is kind of useful, and brushing up on some basic technique, just basic microphone technique. And I can get more into that in a bit, but just for the minute, I think it is. The other thing to think about is, do you have a format, or at least what's your kind of shtick? Like if someone's and listens to your podcast and wants to recommend it to their friend, what's the thing they're going to say? They're going to be like, oh, that's the podcast where they do this, or they did this thing where they went hunting for rare animals, or they obviously hunting in the nice sense, or that's the one where they ask people about their favorite birds or something. So just think about what's your shtick. It's a crowded marketplace, and you need to be distinctive in some way. Or it's the one where they investigate wildlife crime in your case. The other thing about podcasting, which is different from radio and is really different, is you're not going to sit in a network. You're not going to sit in something that already has an audience. You're going to sit on a platform like Apple or Acast or Spotify, and you're going to have to run your audience yourself. So, like, how are you going to get visible? How are you going to make people know that you've made something? Like, can you leverage a brand? Can you leverage some celebrity? Or are you kind of in for a slow build, which a lot of podcasts are? So you've just got to be realistic about how you're going to find your audience and how your audience is going to find you. And then finally, and this is really one about organizations, is just think about talent. The most obvious person to do a podcast for an organization isn't always the best person to do it. And the best person isn't always the most senior person. So just, if you're thinking of getting into this market, and obviously podcasting is one of the things podcasting has done is open up the possibility of production and audio production to all sorts of institutions who didn't do it before. But if you are getting into it, just don't assume that your existing hierarchies will map onto this endeavor. Work out who's going to be the best at this and let them do it.
I think those are all really great points. And I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle where I am an independent. I'm making my own content.
Yeah.
I'm doing it, kind of one-man band style. And what I will say is that the technical aspects, they're not the most important at the start. Storytelling is going to be what leads you through. I've listened to plenty that started recording in a cupboard on a microphone on their laptop and made it huge. But they are important. And knowing how to edit, if you are doing it yourself, that's a big skill to have to learn if you don't know it already. I know a lot of people who are watching will be science communicators first and foremost, and then be on the technical side and wanting to make podcasts. So the format aspect, the storytelling, that really is key to me. And also there's a lot of stuff to do around the podcast if you're doing it yourself. So you have to build a website and get domain names, and social media, of course, is so important. So it is a lot of work, especially if you're doing it yourself.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. I mean, it's a funny thing. It's a lot of work. At the same time, we are in an age where all of this is just than it ever has been. So it's really, it's really good news and it's very exciting. But yes, at the same time, it's not a casual undertaking, I suppose, if you want to make a really good podcast. And you're absolutely right about all of those craft skills, which you can pick up in the doing of it, but they do kind of matter. Yeah,
you'll have to learn them one way or another as you go along anyway. So common pitfalls. What are some of the things for people to avoid, some words of warning?
Well, yes, so that's a good question. So certainly just like not thinking hard enough about it in the first place. I suppose not thinking hard enough about your audience. Like, what's your offer? Not thinking about what your format is. Like, what's the point of the exercise? Technically, and I suppose given this conference, a lot of people might be doing stuff outdoors. Some very specific things is like learn about what wild track is. I won't go too much into the definition of it. Just learn about it. I mean, basically, it's Atmos from the location in which you recorded, taken clean, so without anyone talking over it, and you can use that basically to cover over edits.
Yeah, very useful.
Otherwise, you can just like the audience can just easily hear an edit when it's got background Atmos being cut as well, so you can smooth over edits. Really, really, really important.
Very much so. And a word of warning: if you download one from the internet and it doesn't have exactly the right birds for that area, the birders will come for you. They know exactly what you should be hearing in that environment that you claim to be in. So the best way is to go out there and record it yourself, or find someone who really knows about these things to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And look, again, for outdoor stuff, simple things like try and get a reasonable mic. I don't spend hundreds of pounds, just like, well under 100 quid you can get a decent mic for. And put a sock over it. I mean, like literally, like ideally buy a raincoat if you can afford one, or a baffle of some kind, because wind is a problem. But actually, you can make one up with a sock, and that really does make a difference, just very practically. And the other thing that absolutely kills you outside is airplanes, because the noise starts early and it finishes late, and the microphone for some reason picks up airplane noise long after you and you can't edit through an airplane because it suddenly disappears out of the sky.
We've all been in that moment where we pause and are just all sort of silent listening, waiting for it. Can you still hear it?
It takes ages, doesn't it?
Yeah, same with sirens in the distance.
Yeah,
and
sirens,
things.
clocks chiming, and all that stuff. You've just got to get an ear for that stuff. I know that might seem like a small thing, but when you're outside recording, it really does influence how you act. So
let's have a look at the polls. Can I see the poll results? Yes, I can. I'm going to vote quickly and skew the results. So yes, the 75% almost of our audience listen to podcasts already. And actually a huge amount of them want to make them. So it's heading for 90%. It's moving around as I'm looking at it. So actually the people are really interested in what you have to say about actually starting up a podcast and how to go about it.
Well, look, please do put, please do put questions in the thing if you've got specific questions about the making and the craft. I mean, we won't get too into the weeds on it, but I'm very happy to field those if they come in.
Yeah, in fact, now might be a really good time for questions. So if you want to send them in, we'll have a couple in a second. First of all, can you tell me about BBC Earth podcast and talk to me a little bit about that, and especially like those aspects we were just speaking about, the format and things like that, and why you think that works and what people can learn?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so this is something we make. It's made by a brilliant producer called Emily Knight, who also presents it, and she's helped by another brilliant producer called Liza Lomas. So everything I'm about to say about it is entirely down to them and not down to me. I just edit it, so I have the pleasure of kind of listening to it and helping out occasionally. This is a podcast that goes out under the BBC Earth branding, and it goes out to a global audience, and it's a sort of an extension of BBC's broad natural history offering. The reason it works is I suppose it has a very clear offer. It's stories about nature and about our experience of nature. So it's like, there you go, bang, there's 10 words. That's what the podcast does. And I think that helps. And it kind of sticks to it. I think more broadly than that, it has a kind of feel that it's quite slick. It's very story driven, which does help. It has a kind of global appeal. People know there's going to be some explanation involved, but it's broadly quite uplifting. And it sort of does that every week. You can do a lot of things within those parameters, but that's sort of broadly what the audience know they're going to get every week. And that sort of habit, that familiarity is really important for podcasting, just indeed as it has been for radio. And the other thing about it, like, it is well put together, like it's got good craft. So, Emily writes a good script. The script is tight, the script is engaging, but it's delivered in a conversational way that's very welcoming. It doesn't feel too formal or too distant. The stories in it, it's a sort of mixed bag of stories, usually 4 or 5 per ep. It lasts about 28 minutes, which I think is quite a good length. Those stories are either, they're always about either animals directly, or they're about people's experience of animals or of nature. And they always have nice story shapes. They have a beginning, a middle, and end, and I'm sure we can come on to story shape in a bit. The other thing they do, I think, really well in it, and it's something that if you're interested in making a podcast, you should really think about, is they use soundscape and they use music really, really well. And soundscaping and music can do a lot of things for you in a podcast. And they use it beautifully. It has a kind of epic feel when you need it. Sometimes they can sort of draw you into an intimate moment. They can change the pacing of it. They can heighten the emotion of it. They can discontinue it as edits.
Very useful.
Super useful.
Yeah.
But I suppose beyond all of that, it has a real authenticity to it, which is a word people use a lot, particularly in regard to podcasting. And again, we can come on to that maybe, but these are people talking about their own lived experience often, or talking about things that are their passions. And that really, really comes through, I think, that authenticity of voice in it. And finally, and the other thing is, it's really easy to put down and pick up again as a listen. And that, again, one of the things that, in a way, podcasting is different from the radio. The pause button exists in a really big way, and it's very easy. It's got lots of entrances and lots of exits. And that, I think, is actually quite important. Because people listen in all sorts of different ways in all sorts of different places now, because listening is portable. I mean, in some sense, the radio was a domestic medium. We think of the box in the kitchen classically, and obviously, things evolve. But podcasting is a portable medium, so people listen in lots of different places, and the willingness of content to adapt to that by being, put downable and pick upable. Sorry, that's a terrible phrase.
We know.
You know what I mean? Is like, that's part of its appeal, I think.
Yeah, and I'm definitely one of the people that listens like that, especially if I know what to expect, especially if I know I can listen to a 10-minute story and maybe dip out if I'm cooking dinner or on my way somewhere on the bus or something like that. I'm definitely, let's call it guilty of listening like that. But...
Oh no, don't feel guilty. I mean, I think actually that it's something that it's a it's a bit of humble pie that producers need to eat. It's like, you're not the most important people in people's worlds.
Exactly.
And actually, radio has always been what we call a secondary medium, and we've always worked on the basis that radio is the thing you can do whilst doing something else. And that's part of its secret and its magic. But often we assume that was in the home, and we assume the listening was sort of continuous and people were drifting out of the room. But now with podcasting, the listening is interrupted much more, because if you're in a place like your bus journey ends, you go to the thing you were going to, like you stop listening. And that's just going to happen when the bus journey ends. It's not going to happen on the basis of when the program ends. So, that's just something we have to get used to.
Yeah, it's a two-way street, isn't it? So you can make content for people, and they're also going to decide how they're going to listen to it.
Right, exactly. And that's fine, because it means actually the act of listening now happens everywhere in a way that it didn't always used to. So that's, we're kind of cool with that as a quid pro quo.
That's cool. Great. We got a couple of questions for you. We've got quite a lot of questions, actually, so I might have to be selective. Any suggestions on a reasonable length of podcast, and how regular do you put one out?
So I'll answer the second one first, which is I would suggest trying to do something weekly. That's how most of them operate.
Yes.
And that's certainly what the audience mostly expect. There are very few, and there are some daily podcasts, and they make a virtue of being called daily. In fact, they're often called the daily. But that's a lot of work, and they usually come out of existing organizations who are doing this kind of stuff anyway. Monthly is... thing about a podcast is, again, this is a distinctive technological point about podcasting. And again, we might get a bit onto what actually podcasting is and why it's changed things. Podcasting comes at you through an RSS feed, and you build an audience through that RSS feed. Basically, they download your content through that RSS feed onto their phone or their device or whatever. And if you leave that RSS feed fallow for too long,
Yeah.
people just drift away from it.
Yeah. We all find when we look through our own podcasts, oh, I haven't listened to that in a while. Why haven't I listened to that for a while? It's just sort of been swept away in the rush of things.
And it can exactly, and they go, so you want to be building habit, you want to be building regular listening. So I suggest if you can, weekly. It's certainly much better, I think, or at least the received wisdom is much better, for example, to do like 8 in a row, do 8 weeks, then have some time off.
Yeah.
Then do it. I mean, again, you don't want too much time off because, again, that RSS feed goes fallow. You know,
But
that's
also
hard.
Building some anticipation over the second series or whatever.
Yeah,
so there's pros and cons to a lot of those. I will add the caveat that as an independent, I am putting them out monthly because that's all I can afford to do. I work a full-time job and I do it in my spare time. So there's also going to be an element of being realistic, essentially.
No, it is. It completely is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And as to the length, I mean, look, the answer is kind of no. I mean, look, most podcasts, there aren't too many that come down below 15 minutes, I guess. Partly that's just because making short form is quite expensive and relatively inefficient, you know. I guess most of them hover between 15 and 40, but then you get lots that are, you know, an hour, some are 3 hours. There's a guy called Dan Carlin who does Hardcore History. It's like a 3-hour monologue on, you know, the Carthaginian Empire. I mean, it's completely brilliant, but it's astonishing. So I'm sorry, that's not a hugely helpful answer. I suppose the real answer is to think, what's the shape of your content? What's the story you're trying to tell?
And who's the audience as well?
And where are the audience going to be at when they're listening? Yeah, and just think about that in terms of your length. So one is like, what length does the material deserve? And of course, the great job podcast, it doesn't have to be the same length. Unlike when you make Much Radio 4 and they say, can you make that 27 minutes and 50 seconds?
That's
exactly.
very true.
It's painful doing that. Necessary, but painful. Podcasting, of course, you can wander around a bit by, you know, you don't want to wander around too much, but you can wander around a bit. But yeah, just think about where your audience are at in terms of what you're offering them.
And here's a really good question that I want to know the answer to. How do you stand out in an oversaturated market? And we might actually get onto this a little bit later when you talk about genres, but...
Yeah, you know. I mean, look, I sit in, on this, in some sense, I sit in the armchair of the BBC, although we have our challenges in that regard as well, for sure. You know, so in a way, you're in a better place to answer that from an independent point of view. If you are literally going without particularly a known brand, or you haven't particularly got a marketing budget. I mean, look, from the BBC point of view, you need to have distinctive content. You need to be doing something that isn't out there yet. And that's really hard because lots of people are doing lots of things. I'll be brutally honest. If you can get a celeb in on it, that helps, like, because they've got profile.
Or an influencer.
Yeah, or an influencer, like, that's smart. Obviously, if you can be good on social media, that helps. I mean, again, though, most of us haven't got hundreds of thousands of followers to just cut our beck and call. But
I would say social media is a really, really powerful one, especially if you are in my position and you don't have much punch behind you. It's free. It's there. Most people know how to use it pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is you have to be prepared for the slow build. That you know you're going to commit to this and keep doing it over time. You just build an audience quite slowly, and obviously success can beget success. In podcasting terms, the single most powerful way to drive audience to your podcast is by having a trail on other podcasts. So we do that. We work that hard at the BBC, and obviously we have a network. So if you're an independent podcast maker, listen to another independent podcast maker and maybe do a deal with them. Yeah, you know, that's probably the single most powerful thing you can do.
That's very good advice.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we should move on. So podcast as a medium. Let's talk about podcasts more generally, especially because they've seen a surge in popularity in recent years, particularly with younger viewers, which I think a few questions were about demographics. Why do you think that is? And what are the advantages of it as a medium?
So why do I think it's for younger, particularly demographically shifted to...
Why do you think podcasts have become more popular, particularly?
So, okay, yeah. So,
why does it work?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I entirely know the answer to that, actually. Well, I definitely don't. But I'll give it a go. So I think the first thing we're going to look, I've actually made actual notes here, so sorry if I'm looking down, but it is, you know, it's sometimes quite hard to grasp the differences. But just knows what it is. So I think we've spent and possibly wasted a lot of time in production circles trying to say what the difference is between podcasting and radio based on the content. And there are differences, and I'll come to them. But often, every time you come up with an example of, well, this is what a podcast does to the radio show, there's something that's just going to
breaks the rules,
yeah, and vice versa. So I think actually you want to step back from that and just look at the technological infrastructure. That's really what is the difference, and that's what leads to all the other differences. So look, essentially, a podcast is a change in the delivery mechanism of audio. So in the olden days, in the linear days, you would record something in a studio. You would basically broadcast that on, I assume, the electromagnetic spectrum. I am no scientist. And obviously that would be received by someone who had a specialist bit of kit in their kitchen, usually called a radio, and then that would play out and they'd listen to it. Generally not on headphones. Podcasting is basically the digitization of that process. So now I record something, I upload it to a platform, which is usually run, can be by the BBC, like BBC Sounds, might be by Apple, might be Spotify, and then someone at a time of their choosing, and that's a really important difference, will download that onto a device and will listen to it, often with headphones, often in some mobile sort of way.
Yeah.
So that's fundamentally what's changed. It's changing how people can listen to and access audio. But that has led also to a change in who gets to make audio. And this is really, really important. So it's a democratization of the medium. So far more people now have access, well, not just to making it, because actually kit has always been quite cheap, or has been cheap for a number of years, but crucially have access to publication. You can make something and you can put it out there into the world and you can build an audience and find an audience. That's a huge change. And that has naturally led to an influx of people into the industry, into the making of it, which has led to all sorts of change and innovation and changes in standards and new people listening, But that's where it's all kind of come from. And the other thing about it, I think, which is different from traditional radio, is that it's completely global.
Yeah.
So there's no geography to the listening, really.
That's a really good point, yeah.
So whereas traditionally, obviously there's a change with radio going online. You want to get radio before you can get it on the internet anywhere in the world now. But historically, of course, radio was a medium that had a location and had a bandwidth and had a series of pylons that the broadcast, and so it was kind of accrued to a place. And podcasting has a global audience, and that means it's weirdly both. It's much broader than radio in the sense that you can make a podcast. And BBC Earth Pod, good example of this. Like, people listen to it all over the world, and we get the statistics, and it's really nice.
Yeah.
But it's also at the same time can be incredibly narrow in the sense that you can make a podcast about like bread, like just about bread.
Yeah.
But potentially, well, not millions of people probably,
maybe
but like
millions
maybe
of people.
millions,
Yeah,
maybe
Bake-Off's
millions
very
of people as the
popular.
bread pod. But you get access to every bread lover in the world if you want, and that's quite a big audience potentially. So again, in how niche you can be, and yet at the same time broad, is interesting in podcasting. So that's my 2 cents worth on the medium itself. Why does it shift younger? I think because it's new. Like, young people get into new stuff, old people don't. I think there's a bit of that. Like, genuinely, technological change usually skews younger. I think also it's a medium that demographically people are able to make their own as creators and creatives. In a way that radio, I think, still, and I have to say, I think, without getting in trouble, I think that's something we've not done very well at the BBC. Is certainly in some of the historically in the linear radio networks, is keep an eye on that younger audience and make sure that they're coming in. It's been a challenge for us for a while. Also, I think because podcasting is able to go to the places where young people are going for their culture. And generally it's not a radio, like as a box, it's their phone, and that's how they consume. And not just them. I mean, I'm 44, but that's how I consume, and so that's another thing that podcasting has done, is it's in the right place. Yeah. And that really matters, I think.
I mean, absolutely. I'll walk around the house and bring my phone with me as I travel around the house getting ready in the morning. And that podcast will be playing in each room of my house as I go, because my phone will be with me either way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, my own Arrival podcast was, I'm going to offend you at this point, but I didn't listen to the radio. We put on the radio back home in Scotland when we wanted to know whether the schools were shut because of snow. We just didn't listen to the radio. When I heard about podcasts, I thought, why would I want to listen to this? It's just kind of radio, but stop and start. And then I listened to Serial, as many of us did, and then I've probably listened to a podcast every day of my life since. The ability to have it at your convenience and on demand is huge with younger people and general media consumers, not just that younger audience.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and you can over-egg the youth thing on it. I mean, it's just a massive change, and it's a complete change in how we consume audio, and it will massively change how we make audio. Yeah. And it's an absolute golden age. I mean, I mean, as someone sitting in an institution like the BBC, we look at it and think, well, there's lots of excitements here, there are lots of challenges here as well, but fundamentally there are excitements here. It's like an incredible time to be a consumer and a creator of audio.
Absolutely. So let me see. Let's have a look at the questions and also polls. I would really like to know how many people binge listen to podcasts, because that is something that young people are often seen as doing, and certainly something that I do. But I'd be really interested to know how many people at home are guilty of absolutely binging one podcast and then moving on to the next, which of course has its pros and cons. But yeah, I would be interested to see what the audience thinks. Let me see. So what about natural history for this younger audience? What does that look like?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, in a sense, probably not made by someone like me. I mean, that's the sort of the big lesson, and I'm, not so egotistical as to not be able to notice it, that actually, natural history young audience might be more distributed and more local and more peer-to-peer, for example. Podcasting allows you to do that.
And diversity. Nobody has to let anybody into that space. People can come into that space on their own and make content that is, more diverse voices are in, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. It's a much more accessible space in that regard, and I think that's really important to it. Yeah, I know so there's that. I wonder, actually, on some level, if it might be a little more urban, actually, or a little more, certainly more local. So it's more about the places in which people live. Certainly, audio as a medium and podcasting as a medium lends itself to that. There is a kind of cottage industry-ness to it. I mean, which is not to say that localism isn't done already, and in some sense, I think Springwatch. I obviously know lots of people in the NHU. I don't work in the NHU. I think Springwatch is a magisterially local program. I mean, it's many brilliant things, but one of them is that, and that's a close observation of UK domestic wildlife. It's brilliant, and I think podcasting is a medium in which you can do more of that. Now, obviously, you can't show any pictures on audio, although actually, of course, with social media content now and the way people consume, often they are consuming on a device that can also show pictures.
Yeah,
which isn't to say that the future of natural history radio or podcasting is to become more like telly. I genuinely don't think it is, but maybe it has more access to kind of graphics and images. Certainly, I personally think that one of the things I'm very interested in with podcasting is a kind of new naturalism, and we've talked a bit about this. By which I mean that part of that's about amateurism. Like, again, if you let a lot of people into an industry and a lot of people into craft, they don't know the rules, and sometimes in a good way and sometimes in a bad way. And I think sometimes you see that in a bad way in terms of technical quality isn't great, or people aren't putting a thing together very well. But what I think podcasting has really done is shown us, in the professional industry, how artificial how much artifice there is in what we do. And there is a kind of wonderful naturalism about the way a lot of people come into podcasting and just talk in their normal voices. You listen to that, and then you realize, and then you listen to some people on the BBC, and you just think, actually, they just sound really weird. And that's kind of fine in the context of linear radio, because the whole network sounds like that.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to that as a podcast, and then you're going on something completely different as other podcasts, that can sound really strange. So I think that is that kind of ordinariness, that naturalism, that informality of tone, all of that, I think, is going to come into. I mean, we see it in other genres, but I think it's going to come into natural history as well.
Certainly, lots of podcasts I listen to, and more in the true crime space. The reason I keep going to those particular podcasts is I feel like those are my mates. I feel like I'm sitting at the pub with them, having this conversation and being let into this chat about a subject. And it's really intimate and very immersive because of that. And you almost forget that you're not actually part of this conversation.
Right, exactly.
And that is fantastic.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's a really good. And look, in a sense, radio's always shed skins in this way, but podcasting's a big one. Like that, that sense that you're listening for companionship and friendliness, and that you have a relationship with these people. And so it's not just you're listening for information or for entertainment, which you are, but you're genuinely, these are people you like spending time with.
Yeah.
And it's like having a really interesting conversation with friends. And I think that absolutely. And I suppose in the natural history space, I think that's terrific, because it I guess the one thing it allows you to do in a way is go very niche if you want. Because once you're sort of into a group of people talking about something, they can take you all sorts of places, into the kind of bat populations in Swindon, or
exactly,
or whatever, the pH value of algae in the English Channel or whatever. Like, you can really go places, and really particular places, and you can see the development of, again, it's that kind of broad narrow thing of programs about natural history, programs about ecology, that might be a bit too niche for a sort of a network radio program or a telly program, but actually are kind of super good for that kind of audience. Which isn't to say specialist. It's not the same point. I think it's really important. It's not necessarily like, therefore it's a program for professionals.
Yeah.
It's about being able to take an audience, a general audience, into a very particular place that podcasting can do. And I think that's exciting about the medium.
Definitely. And I would like to draw your attention to the poll, which actually has surprised me. So do you binge listen to podcasts? We've got a 40% for yes and a 60% for no.
So you're surprised because you thought they'd be higher for the yeses?
I just presumed everyone was like me and listens to a 10-hour series over, a day and a half. But apparently that's just me. That's fine, though. That's really interesting to know.
4 out of 10 people already on that.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. I'll give you some podcast recommendations later to binge.
I suppose one of the things there is, though, that podcasting can sort of be what you want it to be. It's a very flexible medium. So there are, and actually, I mean, this goes to the cliche about attention spans reducing. I mean, there's obviously nonsense when it comes to podcasting because people listen long hours at in-depth, complicated stories.
Yeah, and the episodes run into each other.
Right, yeah, and people just keep going on them. So you can do that. And you can, just ping in and out of stuff, and there's format chat, and you can dip around, and, you can be as sort of magpie-ish. Forgive me, people who actually know about magpies, in that regard. So in a way, it's a very open house for people listening in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. So you touched on how do you do natural history without pictures.
Yes.
You touched on that a little bit. Let's talk about sound. How do you use sound in a podcast? Because obviously it's sort of the most important technical part of that in one way or another, but it's also different ways you can use it.
That's right. And again, I sort of, in order to organise my thoughts, I've actually made some notes which I've now lost.
Which I've brought this up horribly out of order, obviously. Let me look at a question while you do that, in fact.
Well, I should really be able to talk about this anyway, but somehow, sort of having made a note, I now feel I need to go and access it.
Absolutely. Let me see. No, you carry on, and I'll look for a nice question for after.
So sound, look, I mean, in a way, you've got 3 elements, basically. You've got voices, you've got your music, and you've got your soundscapes, which ranges all the way up from just what the hell was going on in the background at the time to something you've really crafted.
Yeah.
So, setting aside voice for 1 minute, just talking particularly about music and sound. Now, obviously, sound is incredibly evocative. And so, in natural history radio, the sound is the closest thing we can get to the animals themselves. So obviously, animal sound or environmental sound, beautifully captured, is very powerful for us. It's transporting, it's evocative, it puts people in places, it sort of goes directly into the brain. And actually, I worked with a producer called Sarah Blunt, who was absolutely brilliant at this. And I know she works with various sound recordists, a guy called Chris Watson particularly. So she has very, very high quality sound coming in, and she weaves and blends it in a beautiful way. And if you look at what we call an EDL, which is, sorry, this is a bit geeky, but when you're editing, you have all your tracks, and up to however many, and then all your audio's on the different tracks, and then you're blending the tracks, and you're cutting, and you're doing all stuff. And you look at one of Sarah's EDLs, and it's got sort of 30 different tracks on it, and it's just a thing of wonder and beauty. So there's that. So in that sense, that's just an extraordinary thing in its own right. But the crucial thing is on something like BBC Earth, where actually everything's a bit more fleeting, we haven't got the time in production to really layer it up as much as that, we still use it to evoke. That's the key thing, to put someone somewhere. Like if this story's set in a desert, it doesn't take much audio to put someone in a desert in that way, or by the seaside, or
we just need a few cues.
You just really
suddenly we
it's a really powerful thing.
Vision everything.
So. Yeah, and then the other key thing, the other thing that especially if you wanted to make something you want to get into, is music, and using kind of incidental music. So music does lots of things for you in a podcast. One of the things it can do is intensifies emotional content. Well, intensifies the content generally, particularly the emotion.
Yes.
Now, you can do that in a slightly clunky way. You can be like, in a way that films this, it's time for the violins.
Yeah.
It's like, don't do that. But also sort of do that. Because that's what we're doing. But then whether that's sort of a sense of grandeur or the humor of a situation or a sense of absurdity, sometimes with a sort of mismatch of music and tone, that's quite nice. Obviously pathos, excitement, you can do all that. You can intensify. It can help you signify changes of mood or tone or story. It's often be like a chapter break, or it can signify the end of something. It's definitely vital for the grammar of a piece of audio, without being too pretentious about it, by which I mean just like how it stops and starts and how you tell people it's stopping and starting. So literally like grammar, like full stops and commas in a sentence. So you can use music to kind of change chapters. You can use music, I've sort of said that, but you can use music to cover over a discontinuous edit.
Yes.
So, if you use music well, all your speech doesn't need to flow. People can just say a thing and then say another thing, and it's
Thank
fine.
Goodness for that.
Oh my God, yeah. Because the other thing it does, and this is its most vital function for me, is it allows for breathing space in a program. It allows the listener to process information. It gives a space in which the listener can process information or emotion. And sometimes it's a space in which emotion can come out. Quite often, I find when you're listening, when someone tells you something emotional, that's the trigger for your own emotions. You hear it, and often it's a piece of music and a piece of musical space, in a sense, after that allows you to emote.
Yeah.
And I think just that you know, again, you listen to producers, and some producers are just absolutely brilliant at this, just allowing the listener time just to have a moment with the content. You know,
that's really lovely, and to have that pacing is a skill in itself.
Yeah, it is a real skill in itself. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about a specific series. So Forest 404, you used quite a lot of these elements in really creative ways. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, I mean, look, the first thing I should say about Forest 404. So, firstly, what it is for anyone who hadn't heard it, and I obviously wouldn't presume anyone had, but it was a drama we made out of BBC Bristol. It's still the only drama I think to have gone to the top of the Apple charts in the UK, so we're very proud of that. And it was a kind of ecological thriller, so it had natural themes. It was set in the future, and it was about a world in which things had been lost. And I won't spoil it because I genuinely think you should go and listen to it. And the main reason I recommend it is because I didn't make it. I was just its editor. It was made by an absolutely brilliant producer called Becky Ripley, and was written by an equally brilliant writer called Tim Attack, both based in Bristol. So when I pick it up, I'm celebrating their work, not mine. So that was really rich. So that actually, if you boil it down, that's basically 3 voices. It's a 9-part drama. They're all sort of 30 to 40 minutes long, but it's built out of 3 voices. So the work, sound, and music we're doing in world building, because it was a piece of sci-fi essentially, was really powerful, and we were very conscious that it would have a sort of continual magic carpet of sound under it.
Yeah, even though it's non-linear, there's 3 different sort of stories going on, and you're jumping between them.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's the sound that allows you to make it seamless, and again,
Exactly.
the sound allows things that are discontinuous to feel continuous, and it just, does all the things I've been talking about, like evokes emotion and allows you to stitch things together and gives you pauses and allows sort of time to pass in the world of the drama. Just all those little things like that it can do, really powerfully. And also just, as I say, world build. So, the sounds of the lifts moving and that sense of a very futuristic science fiction-y world that they lived in. All of that is really imaginative stuff that just puts a picture in your head. So it's it's a cliche, but it's true, and it's especially true of this. It was an incredibly filmic piece of audio that it put pictures in people's heads. You can see the cityscapes, you can imagine the circumstances. Yeah, and the sound did that really, really well. I mean, along with like brilliant script, brilliant performances. Like I'd say, like the speech was good too, but that stuff. And then because it had a natural history theme, we did a 9-part drama, and then we appended to each drama a kind of little talk about some of the ideas behind each episode, and like some factual talks about the actual real world and some of the things that had inspired the drama. And then we put soundscapes into the feed as well, which were just pure rich soundscapes made by a guy called Graham Wild, who does a lot of stuff for the NHU, and that was if you want to walk in a rainforest, you just put that on, stick your ears in, and you're there.
Perfect. Yeah. But it was really interesting how you managed to still get a conservation message in there. And this is something I'm really interested to ask you: is how do we tell conservation messages or messages about climate change or some of these really heavy topics in a way that people still want to listen to? And this is a really big question.
It's a huge question, and like obviously everyone who's in the industry, I think wrestles with this an awful lot, because you have a responsibility to the state of the planet as it is, which is not great. You want to get a big audience in, and you have a responsibility to your audience, their expectation, and also you don't want to lose the wonder. Like, you don't want to just be making programs about how terrible everything is, I think. Yeah. I mean, not purely from a pragmatic point of view in terms of appealing to a wide audience, but just I think, like, there's a reason it's worth saving, and you shouldn't lose sight of that. I think the dial has obviously, shifted recently. I think editorial it's shifted. I think an organisation like the BBC has moved quite a long way in what it feels it can say about certain things. Personally, the stuff I make, and there are plenty of places in BBC radio and podcasting where you can go for a more hard-hitting message, but the stuff I make tends to be at the more wonder end of things. So BBC Earth Podcast is a wonder play.
But there's also conservation, lots of science communication, lots of those messages.
No, there is. So it's all full of that. It's the wonder that brings them in some sense. But whilst they're in there, like, we tell them all sorts of stuff, and we point out that things are in trouble, and we do all of that. But also, I do think, like, the way you make people care through wonder. So if you want someone to listen to your podcast and then go away and actually do something about it, then I think the way you make it do that, and you make them do that, is by making them care. And that's, for me, still about wonder, still about the extraordinary magic of these things and these places and these animals. And that's the energy. That's and then the message hopefully helps them where they might go.
Fantastic. And my advice would be, if you feel like there isn't something out there already that is sending the message that you want to send, go and make it.
Yeah, do it. Go for it. Yeah,
This is, nobody needs to give you the mic for this. You can take it and make your own content, saying what you need to say. And I'm sure there'll be other people who want to hear it out there. That's certainly what I'm doing. So we're running out of time a little bit. The last thing is genres. So podcasts are dominated by quite a lot of genres. I see a lot in the questions about this, and there's some specifics that I'll maybe speak about after, but these genres like true crime and comedy and interview podcasts, what can we learn from these? Because one of the things we've kind of already spoken about for me is positivity, and taking, from true crime and what I listen to. I listen to some really dark podcasts, basically, but you come out of it still wanting to hear more, still feeling good about it, having these calls to action and thinking about how you can make a difference about these injustices. And I think that's great. What else can we learn from different genres?
So in terms of how we make natural history, well, in some sense, I want to turn that around and say, look, podcasting is more genre-laden than radio in a way. In that sense, podcasting as a whole looks a bit more like television and publishing, that, because these kind of big genres are moving in a way they haven't always been there so strongly. I probably would turn that around and just say, think about what natural history looks like within those genres. Like, because we've always thought about natural history as a genre in itself, and quite right too. But actually, and you're doing this, and with Forest I'm doing that. Is your podcast a true crime podcast? Is it a natural history podcast? Is it a nature podcast? It's all these things. So it's using the true crime genre to put out an ecological message, and that's great, because there's a reason that genre works, because it's gripping, it's exciting, it's got lots of tension, it's got plot, it holds an audience, So you're using that to put out a message, and that's great. And something like Forest 404 was the same. Exactly, it's about how can we put out a message using drama, hugely popular genre. Let's think about where natural history can go. In genre terms.
And I sent that the series of podcast Forest 404 to people who don't, are not so involved in environmentalism, who don't care about the nature the same way that I do. I sent it to lots of people who just like sci-fi and just like drama and just want to listen to a story.
Right,
and you also get to deliver that message at the same time, and I think that's fantastic. All right, I think we're running massively out of time. How time flies. There's lots and lots of specific questions in the chat. Things about, do you need copyright to use music? How do you put it on all these different platforms? Yes. I will be around on all the sessions and the networking things and the fireside chats and stuff like that. I can answer all of the specific questions that you have, the really easy ones. I think we better wrap up, otherwise I'm going to be told off, basically. So any parting messages that you want to give?
Just get out there and make it. Yeah. If you want to make it, get out there and do it, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great parting message, and podcasts give us the opportunity to do that. So thank you very much for your time today.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the conference putting the session on as well, and all the people here who are making it possible to be here in person with COVID-19 protection, of course. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.